Thank you, Chairman. Minister, on the 19th of March 2020, this House gave you very draconian powers. You will recall it, we debated aspects of it. But like all draconian powers, they're very circumscribed and limited to very specific circumstances. The powers were, by order, to declare an area or region in the state to be an area where there is known or thought to be sustained human transmission of COVID-19, or from which there is a high risk of importation of infection or contamination with COVID-19 by travel from that area. And when making such an order under the section, you were required to have regard to the Chief Medical Officer. On the 7th of April, having sought the advice of the Chief Medical Officer, you declared that the state, being every area or region, was an area where there is known or thought to be sustained human transmission of COVID-19. Exactly 6 weeks later, on the 19th of May, the Chief Medical Officer told the COVID-19 Committee, sitting just behind where you are now, in broad terms, we have effectively extinguished it from the community in general, right across the state. On Tuesday, Dr. Killian de Gascon and Professor Nolan, both members of NEFID, accepted that there are areas in which it is neither known nor thought to be sustained human transmission of COVID-19 at present. Well, if that is the case, Minister, what is the basis in law or in fact for the existence of the affected areas order in respect of those specific areas, the order which you made on the 7th of April and forms the basis for further restrictions? You joked about Kerry and Sligo at the start of this session being areas where there hasn't been transmission for a long time. Clare is another area where there hasn't been much transmission for a long time. But you see, my question is, I accept that in a small country like Ireland it's very difficult to differentiate one area from another. But merely because it's difficult to differentiate doesn't make it lawful to impose restrictions if the legal basis does not exist for those restrictions. So my question specifically is, have you sought the advice recently of the Chief Medical Officer or the Attorney General for the ongoing restrictions which state that in each and every area and region of this state there is known to be or thought to be sustained human transmission of COVID-19? Because if there isn't, in my respectful view, a basis in law to maintain restrictions. Now, Minister, I accept that there are distinctions between areas, and it would be very, very difficult in Ireland. But, one of the most basic aspects of the rule of law is that public officials should exercise their powers in good faith and not exceed their powers. And it's very important that we're sure of that. You mentioned funerals at the start of this, and you said that the new regulations allowed up to 25 people to go to a funeral. Well, I've had a look at those regulations, and they are your regulations, Minister. And there's only one mention of the word funerals, and that's to allow persons who provide accommodation to accommodate people going to a funeral. But there's no restriction. There's no restriction on any religious activity in these. Because I would expect it's because any restriction on religious activity may be unconstitutional. It's certainly, public health is not a basis to restrict worship in Ireland. And we operate, a separation, at least in theory, we've always operated a separation of church and state in this country. Certainly it's in the Constitution. And there are limitations on what a government can do to interfere with worship in this state as provided for in the Constitution. Minister, I'd urge you to move away from laws which are unenforceable. And it sort of slipped out into the media that the movement restrictions in these regulations aren't being enforced or won't be enforced or can't be enforced by An Garda Síochána, and move towards areas, the general health regime.